Hello, 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 and welcome to the Legends podcast. It is February, and we are in almost 1 year of the coronavirus debacle that's happened unfolded in front of us over the last year. This interview will air probably in March, I think, or maybe late February. I think late February, and I'm talking today to Martine Cotton. Hi, Martine.
Hi, Sigsy Zara.
You call me what you want. That's my nickname, Sigsy. Nobody's mentioned that before. How brilliant. It's followed me around the world over the last 50 years, almost 50 years now. So let's get into it. So before I give Martine her introduction, and you know, I believe there are so many ways to lead a life and everybody has stories, and wait till you hear Martine's, just amazing. I just want to throw out a few fun facts about Martine. So first of all, Martine actually photographed my Tokyo wedding, and it was the first ever wedding she'd photographed. She just started kind of tentatively telling people she was a photographer, and I was like, I will hire you. So that's fun fact number one. And fun fact number two is a few years ago, we celebrated one of Martine's big birthdays in New Zealand together, and we had a banquet in Hobbiton. The actual place where the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit was filmed, and we had so much fun. It was crazy, wasn't it? So
it was amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. So as you can see, Martine and I have known each other for a long time, but even so, I would still find her story really, really fascinating for reasons that will become apparent. So I'm going to give you your kind of formal rock star introduction now, Martine. So Martine describes herself as something of a Jill of all trades, or many trades, and perhaps you could call her a multi-potentialite. She's forged out career stints in the music industry as a venue manager, band manager, major and small festival and event producer, a booking agent, a tour manager, marketing and social media director, graphic artist, web builder, and music industry educator. Outside of the music world, she's worked as a professional photographer, newspapers, weddings, portraits, events, and live music, a writer, a cook, a horse and cart driver. Really? Yeah.
Really?
An English teacher, a blogger, and a university tutor. In 2019, getting itchy feet and a 5-year stint running her own online music industry professional development education platform. Goodness me, I should have done warm-ups before this. She started studying a Bachelor of Health Science degree at the University of Queensland. Now, this is the thing that really, really piqued my interest to talk to you, Martine, because of this incredible U-turn in your career. And so she's majoring in nutrition and public health, and now on the best side of 50, I'm taking the best side of 50, she has for the first time settled quite comfortably in the same house and city for over 6 years, and absolutely loving being immersed in study. So that is quite a convoluted, not convoluted, but like an amazing twisty turny story there. And I absolutely love it. And that's not even starting with your childhood, what happened before all of this. So let's get into it, Martine. So why don't you tell us about your ancestry, your childhood, and your upbringing?
All right. Well, I was born in Brisbane, in Queensland, to a quite well-travelled, independent, fiery young woman from a feminist family. And she married I'm going to call him a cowboy for want of a better word. He was a long, multi-generational cattle farm owner and worker. So our whole, on Dad's side, the Cotton family is quite famous for cattle ownership and big land. And he was a drover, and he had gone to boarding school. He left school and went out to work on the land for years. And he met Mum. It's such a lovely story. He met Mum at the Surfers Paradise Beer Garden, and I did find out recently that they'd actually met a few times before that, but the time that they re-met after Mum came back from living overseas for 6 years, he basically asked her out on a date, and they went on 3 dates, and he drove down to Sydney to meet her, and he asked her to marry him, and she said yes, like that. So it was definitely a true love story, and I love that. They decided to go and live in New Guinea. The opportunities at that time were big. So while Mum stayed in Brisbane while she was pregnant with me, Dad went up to New Guinea and set up a house in Rabaul in Bougainville. And he got a job with Hastings Deering as the head guy on a road building contract. And yeah, so I was 2 weeks old and on a plane to New Guinea, and my poor mum, 2 weeks old.
Wow.
The picture is of me sitting on my dad's lap on a pillow with the seat belts. Back in those days, there were seat belts that went this way, or at least on that plane they were. And so he had the seat belt, and he was holding me tightly, and Mum was asleep.
Hey, Martine, sorry, deep bow to your mum, because that's 2 weeks postpartum, flying off, 2-week-old. That's like, I mean, amazing about you, but what?
Well, it gets better, because we went to settle in New Guinea, and there was, we were one of a handful of European or Western families living in the town Rabaul. And we ended up getting a family to move in with us. Joseph and Katerina and their 3 kids were locals. And they basically, we moved into a place that had 2 living arrangements. So we lived in one house and they lived in the other. And basically they helped bring me up, me and my brother, who came along 3 years later. And we've got so many photos from that time of me just hanging out with them. they were. I was with them all the time. I grew up with them, with those 3 kids, and Joseph and Katerina. Anyway, yeah. So Mum was pretty much bringing me up on her own. Dad had to go off on long contracts to go and build roads out in the jungles, and we'd sometimes go with them and live in the jungles, like in tents. And I have a really vivid memory. I was still very young, so maybe 4. Of us crossing, we were camping somewhere, and we got word of there was some rain up the mountains, and we knew that the river was going to flood and it was going to chop us off from civilization, and it might have been quite a long period. So what they ended up doing, they bulldozed a whole lot of trees down and cut them up, which is terrible. And built a sort of a bridge across a flat part of the river, and the bulldozer pulled the Land Cruiser with Mum and me and my brother and all of the, our camping gear across the river and into safety. But it was really scary. The water was rising literally a foot an hour and flowing really fast. So that was quite, and we did actually get dragged down the river, and the bulldozer had to, pull us through. Everyone was very nervous, but it was very exciting. That was a very vivid memory. Then we came back to Australia. There was lots of activity around independence, and we just knew things were going to change a lot in New Guinea. My parents were part of, they were the older generation. They still had a pretty, Dad came from a very racist family, very racist. Mum was far more open-minded. And she was actually a teacher there. She was teaching with the tribes there. But we knew it was going to change everything when independence came. So we came back to Australia, and I started school. And so I went to school here in Brisbane. Apparently we were little ferals. At the time that we moved, my brother and I both used to shimmy up coconut trees to get coconuts, and we refused to wear clothes. And the only things we ate were bananas and tinned sheep's brains. We'd never seen a television. the first time we saw a television, it was a football game playing, and we were running around the room behind the TV to see where the football players were. We couldn't understand it. Anyway, we bought a house. I went to primary school, and then I went to high school. I went to a boarding school because my parents wanted to move up the coast away from Brisbane. So I went to the school that my mum went to. It was a private school run by Anglican nuns, and it was pretty horrible. And I have a theory that I have a thing called attachment disruption disorder because of my time at university, at boarding school. Mm-hmm. And I often say that it took me 5 years of uni straight after 5 years of boarding school to kind of heal from a lot of the trauma of boarding school and being surrounded by my peers, you know, teenage girls, 24/7, no escape, bullies, no freedom, no privacy, etc. Anyway.
No, that's really interesting, Martine, and I'll come back to that, but I'm interested to know a bit more about your mum and dad, actually, because they sounded like a real blast. And I know that you said here your dad came from a very racist family and your mum came from a more kind of feminist family, and she was a little bit more open-minded, and he was as he was, and so on. And but I also know that they were like quite a blast as a couple, weren't they? I mean, and I know you adored them. Tell me a bit more about them.
They were so much fun. I think New Guinea probably really set them up to be the party animals that they became, because the expats that were living there at the time were so stranded. It was quite I shouldn't say stranded, but it was because it was a real outpost. So drinking was prolific. That we would all go to each other's houses, be it the houses in town or out on plantations, and they would just drink and party. And some of the photos from that time are ridiculous. It certainly set them up as lifetime, functioning alcoholics. They from then right through till the time they died, they drank like a bottle of rum between them, like a night or maybe over 2 nights, and beer and Coke with the rum. And yeah, so they were a lot of the life of the party everywhere they went, especially Mum. She loved talking to people. Often I'd bring friends home when I was at university, and she'd sit up talking to them, drinking with them till 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would have gone to bed hours before because I'd heard all the stories a million times before. And my friends all adored her. She was gorgeous. They were both gorgeous. Yeah.
This is just a truly curious question, because I know that you have quite a social activist soul now. And when you look back on that, what's your feelings about? You mean, you said like, oh my God, we pulled a forest down to rescue us, or like, or my dad came from this kind of thing, or the kind of, the plantations and stuff and things like that. I'm just truly interested to know, through your social activist eye there, that's the question.
Well, obviously it was a different generation and they didn't know any better. They didn't know any other way. It's interesting because I see photos of my dad's family, like the old family albums, and I see these, cattle stations out west of Queensland, and there's a lot of Indigenous First Nations people in there, in these photos, in their white dresses and shirts, and they're intermingled with the families of the white fellas, and certainly a part of that thread. So I know that they had value to my father's family, and there was certainly a sort of a strange relationship there where, they thought they were doing the right thing by giving them, by bringing them in and, feeding them, but they couldn't see that what they were doing was actually modern day slavery. and taking these people off their land, away from their families and their communities, was destroying the fabric of Aboriginal society. And yeah, it's interesting. I've had, you know, my uncle, the remaining uncle that is still alive on my dad's side, he and I have a lot of fights about, well, we have strong disagreements about a lot of that stuff. And I'm actually, we've actually come to a point where we've had to say, we agree to disagree, and we're never talking politics or racism or social justice matters ever again, because he takes it really seriously and I take it really seriously. And we will never overcome those differences if we dwell on them. And I adore him and he adores me. So we just, you know, we just let those differences exist. They're a real part of life in relationships.
Yeah, it's tricky, but I think it's a question worth answering, especially, you know, against the backdrop of the last few years as well, when so much stuff has come up to the surface about this kind of thing. Like for us, let me say, for us. But obviously not for the people who are on the receiving end of it. But I just thought it's really interesting, and without any accusation or anything like that, just simple curiosity of where that conversation went there. And because I saw, if you're listening to this, you would have seen Martine's face when she said, like, and so we chopped loads of trees down, and her face looked like, oh, just so sad, because you know, you have this kind of very conscious way of living. I think would be a conscious way of living, I think would be a good way to put how you live your life. Would that be fair?
Yeah, definitely.
In Japan, we call it mottainai. It's kind of like the not wasteful way of living, and would that be fair, Martine?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. So so your mum and dad were like the life and soul of the party, and they loved to drink and throw parties, and they were kind of this kind of people that people satellited around.
Yes.
And they lived fully, like a really full life. Is that right?
Absolutely. both their funerals had hundreds of people and a lot of laughter.
Oh, they sound great. I would have loved to have met them myself, but unfortunately I arrived.
They would have loved you.
What are you trying to say? So when you were talking about like going on to boarding school then, so this is quite normal for people. So let me just get the geography right. So you were in Brisbane, your mum and dad wanted to move north, is that right?
Yeah, but only an hour and a half's drive north, so to Mooloolaba, which is
Mooloolaba. Okay.
Yeah, seaside, beautiful town. So I mean, mum had spent a lot of time living there on and off as a child, and both families went there for holidays. It's a popular holiday destination for Brisbane people.
Okay. All right. And so a lot of people who live in these kind of more remote areas tend to have their kids go to boarding school. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you said that attachment disruption disorder.
It explains everything. It's only a new thing. I've just sort of recently discovered it, but it explains everything. Like, oh my God, it's me.
Yeah.
It's basically where you're extreme high functioning or high level independence.
Yeah.
To a fault.
Okay.
Meaning that the whole, that's why I've never had a very long relationship and never married. I just can't stand that level of, don't want to say compromise, but just, you know, impedance. I don't want to have to change what I want to do.
You like freedom
for someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like my freedom. Yeah. That's all it is.
Freedom and independence, autonomy.
Yeah, but it's you know, that's problematic as well in itself. So it's quite bad. So that, and then, you know, fierce ambition, always wanting to be the best at everything, to a fault, and driving yourself endlessly till there's you know, not a lot left. You give everything to the project that you're on, which is something I've always done, and, you know, almost kill myself. And certainly now that I'm getting older, I'm recognizing the dangers of that and pulling back. And I'm a lot gentler on myself, and I do not, the realities of just, you know, just doing a job and getting it done well. It doesn't have to be excellent. It doesn't have to be the best that anyone's ever seen. So, yeah, and it's really interesting, this whole, it's boarding school syndrome. And if you do a search, you'll see that most of the UK ruling class, the sort of politicians, all went to boarding school, and they're all a little bit, you know, that a lot of them went a lot earlier than I did. Like, I only started in grade 8, so so I was 13. But for a lot of, in the UK, it's a lot more common to send kids as young as 5 to boarding school, and that's really quite disruptive to, you know, family ties and fears of abandonment and all that stuff. So yeah, listeners should Google it. Boarding school syndrome. It's fascinating.
That is really, really fascinating. What do you think are the payoffs of that, though? What do you think it's given you as well? Because I know you to have a capacity for great joy, great fun, great organisation. Oh, and P.S., that works really well for me. We did a road trip together, and I was like, do you want to like do all the organising? And you were like, I've got a spreadsheet, yes. And I was like, good, no problem. We hired a car, and I was like, do you want me to put my license on there as well so we could share the driving? And you went, no, I can't stand I couldn't stand it, having somebody else on these roads. They're really hard. And I was like, not a problem. Like, for me, I'm in seventh heaven, because I like a nice quick decision. Do you know what I mean? And I also understand that lots of different people have different, how can I say it? People have different values around that area, or different wishes and needs. And I think that, like, some people want it to be fair. So if I just sat back going, no problem, you do all the driving, they'd be very angry. But actually for you, that was really useful, because it meant your stress levels were down, or your anxiety levels were managed, or like, you know, I've got a spreadsheet. So I was like, okay, you've got it covered. Do I need to do anything to the spreadsheet? No. Okay, good. Just pay me. Okay. I mean, pay you for all the like accommodation we got and everything like that. So it was a nice balance, really.
Well, it's the only way to manage that many people, you know, like,
absolutely.
Over that 3-week period, we had people coming and going from the country, and, you know, like, oh my God, how are we going to make this happen? So that spreadsheet is the single thing that
it was brilliant.
Kept it going.
But yeah, I just was taking it, and it makes sense now, like, against the backdrop of what you've just said as well. It makes perfect sense that, like, you would want to kind of have that control there. And it makes perfect sense, like, for me as coach, knowing that there are lots of different ways that people like to do things, to just take the temperature and then kind of adjust my own expectations around that. Yeah. Funny.
It was
but that's the thing, though, isn't it, Martine? I mean, these well, you call it a disorder. These kinds of attachment styles, or anything that shapes us when we're younger, they have value as well as disruption later in life as well. So this allows you to do all these incredible things in the world as well, to an nth degree, and it makes you Martine as well, and it makes you highly respected, highly trusted, all that good stuff too, I think. So I'm not trying to like spiritually bypass or like toxic positivity here. It's just worth noting that, I think.
Yeah, and I do agree. I think my fear of being trapped again has absolutely driven that diversity in my choices. Having to constantly change things up. I get bored very quickly, and I actually feel physically ill if I feel trapped.
Right. Like somebody you were pointing to your chest there. Is it like somebody's kind of standing on your chest or something?
Yes.
Ooh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't once I've reached the end of the challenge and the learning from a situation and I'm bored, I can't do it anymore, and I have to change. And if I'm really trapped into that particular position or situation, I start to feel really ill. It's full on.
It's physical.
And that's why, it's physical, and that's why I have to constantly change. my path and my location. In fact, you know, it's bizarre. I've been in this house now for 6 years. It's the longest I've ever lived anywhere, even with my family.
Yeah.
And I actually love it.
But
I'm obviously
you have people
cranking.
cycling in and out of there as well, don't you?
Yeah, yes, yeah, flatmates come and go. And they're all lovely, and they all bring something different to the house. And yeah, and you know, we build a lovely family environment, and it's very supportive and nurturing.
I think also as we get older, and I've noticed this especially around benchmark birthdays, 30, 40, 50, you just kind of go, you know what, I think I'll just let go of a little bit of this now. The earlier the better, because otherwise you spend years just protecting a child, basically. But also that has its value too. And I think that one of the lovely things about this story, Martine, or one of the encouraging things about this story, is that those things can sit together. It's not an either or. It's not that you're dysfunctional or that you're having a terrible life. You're having a rich and full life, while at the same time having this, you know, this boarding school syndrome, as you called it, you know, as well. And then as we get a bit older, we start to let go. Personally, I just want to enjoy my days. I want to enjoy my days without too much anxiety.
Yeah, I think once you hit 40, 50, that is absolutely a natural transition. And I see it with all my friends my age. We really love the little things.
Yeah.
We come to a realization that it is the little things that you know, a beautiful meal with friends, or you know, I posted on Instagram yesterday, I spilled some water and it just exploded in this really weird pattern, like just this bunch of dots around the outside, and it was beautiful. And I took a photo of it because I was shocked. It was really unusual pattern, and and that brought me joy. And I had a good laugh about it.
Absolutely the same. And ever since we visited you in Port Douglas,
yeah.
In Port Douglas, which is in far north Queensland, and you had your desk set up to look out onto that lovely little kind of tiny tropical garden you had there. Like, I now have my desk set up to look out onto the garden, and not onto the garden, out into the sky and out into the hills of Zushi. And in my last house, I had my desk set up to look out, and Keisuke was always like, we always say, like, to be like Martine's desk setup you had there as well. I think that's really important, those little things that make you feel joy every single day. When you finished boarding school, then were you like, yes? And then did you go directly to university, or did you have a gap year directly?
No, straight to uni.
When you finished university, then what were you interested in, and what did you study at university?
I studied filmmaking. Well, it was a Bachelor of Arts majoring in I'd always, even at school, I did a lot of theatre, drama. I performed in a lot of plays, and my strengths were English and history and speech and drama. And I loved filmmaking, and, you know, I don't know, I just love that stuff. So Bachelor of Communication, majoring in Film and Media Studies. So, and that's where I met, it was absolutely life-changing. And so that 5 years was the sort of the anchor to everything that follows.
Yeah.
It was mind-blowing. It was where I, you know, fell in love and, you know, met boys. And within the first year I was out, you know, clubbing all night and partying. I fell in with a crowd of musicians and people who loved music, and you know, and I loved music. So we just bonded over going to live shows and dancing all night. And I remember the first time I ever came out of a club, and it was dawn. And, you know, I would have been, and I, because of the way the schooling, my birthday worked in the schooling schedule, I was actually 17 for my first year of uni. So I was living on campus at the time for the first 6 months. And so I was 17, obviously sneaking into clubs, and coming out of clubs and seeing the sun coming up. And my best friends were there to this day. we have so many stories from that time. And of course, the work that we were doing too was really important. We were making films, we were watching films. Like we had to watch. It was part of our lecture material. Was that, you know, we'd have a lecture and then we'd go in and watch a movie for 2 hours and then have follow-up lecture and a tute, and we'd all discuss. And, you know, it was Jean-Luc Godard and, you know, all the French cinema and the Russian cinema and, you know, Metropolis and all that. And then script writing, and I think that really developed my writing skills. I always loved writing. I used to write little Mills and Boons stories at boarding school for my friends and I, using Duran Duran or Adam and the Ants as the leading men. And and that's also where I fell into event management, because a lot of my friends were a little bit useless, and I just have a natural knack for, you know, infrastructure and logistics. I just understand it. So I started helping organise shows for my friends, gigs, and I got involved with the student union, and we were putting on lots of shows. I was looking after like a lot of the entertainment, and then I got the job as the O Week director in the year. So I finished my degree in '89. I had a little break in there, went up and lived in North Queensland for a little while. Oh, after a massive fight with my father, and we didn't talk for 2 years. That's another story.
Wow.
And of course,
families always in there, aren't they?
Yeah. So I took 6 months off uni and lived in North Queensland, came back, finished the degree, and went straight on to organise the orientation week for the following year. And it was massive, and it was considered, you know, we had the most money that we'd ever had, just through extensive fundraising. And we had this big international band playing and a bunch of local bands and film nights and market days. And oh my God, I loved it. And that was the beginning of my relationship with event management and, you know, venue management. I loved it. And that was uni.
That was uni. And then when you left uni, then you then went back into event management. So one of the things I really, really know about you is that you love music, like love music. It's playing all the time. It's really interesting. I just have like images of us in the car with the little speaker hanging up there listening to Nick Cave and all these other things. And and you used to go and see a lot of live bands and things as well here in Japan, didn't you?
Yeah.
So then what happens after you graduate university? Do you go into a job or do you kind of float a bit?
No, well, I took a break. I'd been, you know, I use this word loosely, but I'd been institutionalized for, you know, boarding school and then university. I just wanted to have a bit of a gap year. So I went to live in Cairns, and I was, by that time, my friend Jackie was making shoes, Pendragon shoes, and I set up a market stall up there for Pendragon shoes. So I sold them. There was 2 big markets a week, and I just lived in a house in the rainforest, this beautiful house, and lots of hippies. You know, we did all the you know, nude swimming. We'd go to water holes, and everyone would strip off, and we'd eat papayas and watermelons and pick coconuts off the trees and crack them open, and it was an idyllic existence. I had various jobs. I was working as a cook at the Jabberguy Dance Theatre for a while, horse and cart driver. So my town, Kuranda, was a really busy tourist town, and I met a woman called Karen who needed someone to help her with her 2 Clydesdales and the big trailer for tourists to take them from the train station, which was a tourist rail trip up the mountain, and then over to the markets. So it was just a 10-minute trip, but people loved it, especially the Japanese. And we would just meet them at the station and trot up the street, and everyone would take photographs of us, and we dressed with the kubras and the white hats and the jodhpurs and riding boots. And I learned how to harness Clydesdales. And worked closely with Clydesdales.
You know how to harness a shire horse. What?
Yeah. And, you know, I'd help with the shoeing. Like, they had to be reshoed constantly because they were on concrete. of bitumen. Yeah, that was lovely. They were beautiful years, but I got really bored. And while I was there, my friends from Brisbane had formed a band that were doing quite well, and they wanted to come up to North Queensland for an adventure. And I basically helped arrange their tour, booked them some shows, and they had a great time. And so this actually happened 2 or 3 times, and the shows got bigger and bigger, and they were actually massively popular. Like, they were selling out the clubs up there. And I decided I'd had enough of North Queensland. So I moved back down to Brisbane to start life. I was up there for quite longer than I expected. I was probably about 3 years. And then I woke up one morning and panicked and thought my life was flashing me by, and I was, floating around a rainforest lake and, missing all of these exciting things that were happening in the city. So, yeah, went down to the city, Brisbane, and the band, they were called the Tooth Fairies, but spelt A-E, not A-I.
Lovely.
They asked me to manage them, and I said, okay, not really thinking about what I was getting into. And they ended up being massively successful. We toured all over Australia, and they were sort of a folk punk band. So they were all covered in tattoos and had wild hair and dreadlocks, and but their music was really infectious and fun. So they were a huge festival band. So we toured all the festivals.
So is that a band that like Aussies would know?
The Tooth Fairies? Well, if they were of a certain era and they went to festivals at that time, yes. They would know them.
Yeah, same with Pendragon Shoes, because like when we went away for your 50th birthday, like somebody was like looking at my photographs and went, wait, do you know the people who run Pendragon Shoes? And I was like, yeah. I didn't know they were.
They're a global brand.
Yeah.
They're
like, I love them. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. My famous cobblers. Not cobblers, shoemakers, I should say.
Oh, no, they call themselves cobblers.
No, okay. Yeah. Amazing. So tell me, so when did this come to an end, the Tooth Fairies then? Well, tell me a little bit more about what's it like managing a band? Is it fun? Is it a nightmare? Is it a combination of both? How do you get them to be so big? What was that like?
A combination of both, good and bad. I went on to manage a bunch of other bands after that and during that as well. So I actually started a bit of a management stable, and I was looking after about 4 or 5 bands. Yeah. Which in retrospect was ridiculous because it's such a big job. So basically, yeah, you are looking after their business career. And the irony was that I had so little business experience, I really didn't know what I was doing. I had to get help all the time working out how to do a, basic, do a tax return and understanding contracts and things. I never really understood them, and we were definitely coming at it from a very underground punk DIY ethic, so that was problematic because in the music industry, if you want to do well, you kind of you need to embrace that side of things.
Subvert from within.
Yeah. So that was challenging. I remained very close to all those boys, but there was a long time where I just couldn't talk to them after a while. I just couldn't be around them. I mean, there was a lot of, I was kind of the mother as well, which is a role that a lot of young, unexperienced people, young managers take on. They take on the emotional support role as well as the business support, and that's a really dangerous place to be, especially if you've got musicians who are already very highly emotional and often a bit traumatized or with a whole range of
they're carrying a lot of shit and baggage with them, right? And then you're totally unqualified as a young woman who's managing and trying to work your own shit out at the same time.
Yeah, and a lot of drug problems.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So
and you were so capable.
Yeah, well, I tried so hard and I burned out. I absolutely burned out. I was just over it. So, we stopped working together. But around that time, that didn't really matter because I'd started working at this venue called the Zoo a live music venue here in Brisbane. And I just started on the bar, but, you know, obviously ended up in the office and ended up one of the owners wanted to become a silent partner, so she took off, and the other owner wanted to go and work at a festival full-time, big festival called the Leeward Festival, which was a huge festival here in Brisbane. So I took on the role as, you know, the manager and booker of that venue for quite a few years, 4 or 5 years. Which was absolutely a magical time.
Was it a magical time? So what was magical about that time as well? Because I can imagine like running a venue, and must have been quite wild as well, but still like, because, and also,
yes, very wild. Oh, the stories.
Well, that time was such a unique time in history for our kind of, what you said, that kind of like folk punk underground kind of subversive kind of, just so much fun at the same time. No phones. How we met anybody, I've no idea. Landlines only, you know. And then
fax machines.
And also, let me tell you, phone bills were expensive too, so you weren't on the phone all the time. And then like, and also the music that was coming up, and then you'd all get together and nobody's holding a phone up to take photos. You're so very present with the people with you in there, and the people there. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. There's an Oasis documentary. I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix. It's quite good actually, Martine. And at the end, Noel Gallagher says, you know, he goes, "You're never going to get another time in history like this." And he talks about, I think it's Nebworth, where where I've got goosebumps thinking about this, where I didn't go and see them, but like where they headlined, and he said that was the last good gig ever. He goes, because the next year everybody they got cameras on phones, and so then that was it. That was the last time people were actually watching, then going out and buying the music in shops where you'd meet other people who were enthusiastic and stuff like that. Now, you know, there's glory days for now as well. I love what's happening now. I love technology. It allows us to do this. But I also am so appreciative of that time. I used to go to a very, very iconic club in Liverpool called Planet X. And anyway, and I just love thinking about that time so much, not in a sentimental way. Well, it is a little bit sentimental, and not in a way where I want to go back, and not in a way where I get, just in a way then I delight over it. And like when you remember a really good meal or really good fun, you know, like Hobbiton or something, you know, just, wow, what a time to be alive.
It was a magical time to be alive. I mean, for me, it was the sense of community, because our scene was really tight-knit, and Brisbane at that time was really exploding with the best bands in Australia. So we had Regurgitator and Powderfinger and Custard and Resin Dogs and Tooth Fairies and Scream Feeder and God, so many bands that were big names. I mean, Powderfinger went on to play stadiums. It was massive, and you know, they used to work at the zoo. The guitarist used to actually be behind the bar at the zoo, or the dishy even. Violent Soho, etc. Yeah, but just really strong music scene, and yeah, people absolutely lived and breathed music. I mean, the stories I could tell, and the touring musicians could really feel it. Like they'd come in and they knew that they were surrounded by music lovers, and they, you know, I remember one of my birthdays, Ed Harcourt, who was a musician from the UK, came and played, and he heard from the staff that it was my birthday, and after we closed the doors, he came out and said, "Oh, I hear it's a birthday." I'm not doing a very good British accent.
No, that was bad.
Sorry. It's a mix of Indian
it was lovely.
Irish.
It was bad.
Anyway, and we got a bottle of TQ hot tequila, and all the staff and we went up to the stage, and he just gave us a private concert with his piano. Sang me happy birthday, and then he sang a couple of other songs and chucked my name into these songs and you know, God, that was so special.
Yeah,
and a million stories like that. You know, I could tell you stories about Nick Cave and Mogwai and Gwen Stefani, and you know, you name it. Danny Warhol's hilarious. hilarious stories. Yeah, and so much fun. And yeah. Anyway, that all had to come to an end. I ended up moving on from that role into a booking agency. I set up my own little booking agency with some friends, but that only lasted about 10 months when we realised that there's just not enough work to support 3 people's career income. So they decided to relocate. So one moved to Melbourne, one moved to Sydney, and I kept the business, and all with very goodwill, and they're still my dearest friends. And yeah, so for 3 years I ran my own little sort of music industry consultancy, where I was working as a promoter, on-the-ground promoter for international and national promoters, booking agents. So what they would do there is, you know, the touring company would book a band, let's say Magnetic Fields, and then would ring me, and I'd be the Brisbane rep for that show. So I would book the show, I'd book the accommodation and the transport, the rider, pick them up at the airport, take them to the hotel, take them to sound check, make sure the show ran properly, and then get them back to the hotel and back to the airport the next day, and report and do the money as well. Because of course back then it was all cash. You know, you'd sit at the table and you'd count out like sticky, wet, gross notes, and that was the payment. Ugh. So I'd leave the venue with like thousands of dollars and have to be really discreet and pretend I was just another drunk girl walking to her car. Weird, crazy times.
Oh my God, I like going back to my, you know, I'd forgotten about this, but the first pub job I had when I was 18, and this is back when pubs were so popular, it'd be like 4 deep at the bar, you know, right?
Yeah.
4 deep at the bar, smoke everywhere, everything.
Yes.
You like, I could like get 4 or 5 pints under at once somehow. I don't know how I did it now, but I had to take everybody's order in my head and then add it up in my head and then just type the final number in and work out the change.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember.
Oh, it's quite cool.
It was horrible. What we ended up doing at the zoo was that we actually did a little cheat sheet on the registers. So we had like 2, you know, we had codes, color codes for the different drinks, and you know, two green tags, you know, meaning beer. Yeah. You know, adds up to 8, and then and then slash change from, and we have these columns and change from 10, change from 20, change from 50. Yeah, it worked super well. It really sped up the process. Yeah, because you know, when you're under pressure like that, you know, it's hard to stay on top of those numbers. There you go.
Wow, it was good though. It was good mental athletics, I think. You know, and it's a good color as well, because when you work in a pub, nobody gives a shit how clever you are or how educated you are. They just want to know that you can add it up and give back the change. That's it.
Yeah.
So,
and pour it.
Yeah, exactly. And serve them a drink. So brilliant. So how did you get to Japan? What prompted you to come to Japan? I'm pretty sure we're getting close to that now.
We are getting very close to that. So I had been there's a role called day managing a band, which is where you've got a really big band or a band that's growing, and they've got management in another city. So I was looking after a band called George at the time, and they had their main management was in Sydney, really big book management label called One Louder, which is run by Bill Cullen, who is a legend of Australian music. He used to tour manage Crowded House and big names, and lovely guy. He and his wife ran this amazing business. So they asked me to manage the day-to-day stuff of the George stuff. So George would come over to my house, my office, and we'd have daily meetings and go through the list. And anyway, so they released their debut album. They'd released an EP, I think, and it had gone really well. So this album was highly anticipated. And sure enough, it went triple platinum in the first month, I think. So we were touring extensively, and it was my first taste of real high-end record label aggressive radio, aggressive newspaper media. And it was quite a shock because I'd come from that quite underground grassroots scene, and I'd walked into this. We as a band, they were old friends of mine. They used to play at the zoo all the time. We just walked into this world that was quite another level, and they'd signed a major label deal, which Beale had negotiated for them. And so every show I'd have to deal with the record label. I was tour managing them as well. So every show we'd have to deal with the record label. They would either want to have some kind of event, meet and greet or schmooze with the local label staff and the local record shop owners. And it just got so smarmy and horrible. It was really quite, ugh. I did not like that level of, this is in the 90s, so things have changed massively since then. But it was quite horrible. And also the band, the pressure was incredible. I would never recommend instant fame on anyone. In fact, I wouldn't recommend fame.
I know, when you say that, I think of Amy Winehouse and just what an absolute beautiful, unbelievable talent she was, and how much like shit she was treated. Yeah, it was shocking. I mean, I remember one morning going in to wake Katie up, one of the singers, because we had to share rooms, and she woke up and she was exhausted, and I said, come on, we've got to do this interview at 10, let's do it. And she just burst into tears and said, it's all happening too fast, I can't do this. And she was sobbing, and and there were other times where I had to, again, the emotional support, sneak band members out of the back door of the venue, like through crowds of people to the car so they could go home and cry. And it was pretty full on. Anyway, I just reached a point where I couldn't do it anymore. And I went to a friend's wedding, and another friend of ours had flown in from Japan to surprise her at this wedding. And she was teaching English in Japan in a little town called Fuji Yoshida. And she loved it. Her name was Mia. You wouldn't have met her because she left before we all sort of became friends. But her name was Mia. And she said, you would love it, Martine. All you need is a university degree and, a sense of adventure. And the final straw for me was that the band had locked in a tour of Europe, and I'd always thought that my travel would come through music. And then they realised that they just couldn't afford to take anyone else, and I wouldn't be going with them, which was quite a knife in the guts. I felt at that time, like I felt quite, after all I've done, I'm not going to get to go on this massive, amazing adventure, So so about 2 weeks after the wedding, Mia emails me, because by then email had started to happen, and said, Martine, my father's just been diagnosed with really aggressive cancer and he's going to die really soon. I need to come home. I can give you this job if you want. Do you want it? Okay. I think I might know Mia. Is she a blondie who lives in Brisbane? Yes, you do know her. I've been to her house. Yeah, Mia Campbell. Oh, well, that house was my house. Was the house I had been living in. Okay, well, there you go. I love to note things like this because there's just so many weird connections. But I know I'm so impressed. So how do you know? Oh, that's right. There was that other girl. Yeah. Yes. Anywho, let's get back on track to you. But I just, again, well, on these conversations that I have with people, I just love kind of joining the dots backwards and making all these connections, and just, I hope that people take heart from these stories, because you hear like how everything makes you who you, it sounds a bit cheesy, but it genuinely means that everybody is made up of all these things that happen around you, and just being kind of aware of them, even backwards. Like, I'm excited about the next 30 years. I've interviewed people who are in their 70s. It's like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen to me then, because they will still be telling me, and when I'm doing this and I'm going to do this, it's like, oh, goody. Yeah, I think it's so true, that consciousness around
who you're meeting and what your choices are around, and the decisions you make around each single happening have a the butterfly effect,
Yeah, they do. And even if you're not noting it, it's nice to sit down sometimes and just go, I wonder what is going to happen this week, because you just don't know that exactly what the ripple effect or the knock-on effect or whatever it is. So this is when you ended up moving to not rural, but suburban / rural Japan, where it's called Fuji Yoshida. It's in the foothills of Mount Fuji. So I guess you had an amazing view of Mount Fuji every day for the first.
I was there for 18 months.
Became an English teacher. That's a U-turn.
It was amazing. It was so wonderful. I was so excited. My dad was so excited for me. My mum had died by this time. He was thrilled for me. He knew how much I wanted to travel.
Yeah.
So I arrived in December. So I arrived from Australian summer, hot, stinking Brisbane days, to the coldest winter Tokyo had in like 10 years.
Yeah.
Landed, caught the train into, I went straight into, where did I go first? It must have been Shibuya. Was it
Shinjuku, I would imagine. To go out west, it's probably Shinjuku.
Yes, yeah, Shinjuku, yes.
That's one of the big clubs. Yeah.
Yes. And just walked around there and saw these mounds of like dirty snow and all the slush. Actually, no, sorry. The dirty snow wasn't until I hit Fuji Yoshida, but it had snowed and it was all damp and slushy, but you couldn't see any white snow. It was freezing. I had never been so cold in my life. New Guinea and North Queensland and Brisbane, freezing. Caught the bus. So I spent a half a day walking around, but I was terrified because I had to get back to the bus station. I didn't want to miss the bus. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no Japanese, knew nothing. So I had my contact, my new boss, who was a Canadian guy at the school, and he'd written out exactly what I had to say at the bus station in Japanese. And so I was like reading this thing out, and I remember being terrified. But the staff were so patient and okay, and gave me the ticket. And I jumped on this bus and went out to Fuji Yoshida and got off the bus, and there were mounds of really tall piles of snow, and I had never seen snow before. So I got greeted by, I've forgotten his name now. He was so lovely. My Canadian boss, who indulged me in, he let me touch the snow and play with it, and he was laughing at me. I was just so in awe. Oh my God, it's snow. Anyway, and so I had my first white Christmas. It was literally just before Christmas. I think I landed on the 23rd. And I went to they had a big dinner for me. All the foreign staff and the Japanese staff, we all came together, and it was my big welcome dinner. And I walked home. Walked home in the snow. Yeah, it was beautiful.
I think one beautiful thing that people probably don't know if they don't live in Japan about Japan is that everything has ceremonies to start and finish. Everything has ritual around it. And we talk a lot about this in the podcast that released today with Gretchen about death and grief, and Japan's brilliant at that as well. But there's always ceremony. There's this kind of social cohesion is really, really important here. But I want to jump forward into your Japan journey as well, because I think one of the threads I can see running through this story is just how brilliant you are at creating community around you and creating these kind of satellites around you and pulling people together. I think one of the words that springs to mind for you is that you're incredibly loyal. I think I am as well. Maybe that's why you and I've been friends for so long as well. But also don't take any shit. It's like loyal, but there's a limit. And very long friendships as well. So you were there in Fuji Yoshida, you were teaching English, blah, blah, blah. Then you end up moving into Tokyo, right? And that's when you really started drawing people together. And I think, again, there was this period in the early 2000s up to maybe 2000 when you left, where there was just, again, this incredible group of really artistic, fun, wild and free people who got together. I think you got involved in music again. You started photography, or you picked it back up again, whatever that is, and then you just started becoming more technical. This was around the time when blogs took off, and that is how so many of us, my assistant, for example, who has been working with me for 5.5 years now, she's not my assistant, she's my COO, she's my chief operating officer, but you know, no, none of my clients need to know that, right? They just need to know that she's the one who's assisting us. So, but you know, there was a load of us all had blogs, and we read each other's blogs. That's how I came to you. So again, there was this wellspring of fun. Deanne, Tracy Northcott, Deanne Love, who I must interview as well. Lulu, Cherry Blossom Adventures. There was a lot of us who all read each other's stuff. And that's how I came to you. So I'm just going to take a quick time out now. No, why don't you tell me how you got up to Tokyo and how you started to create this community around you? And then I'll tell you.
It had already started. Before I left Fuji Yoshida, I was lured to Tokyo because of the blogging. I'd started blogging from the moment I arrived.
You were
I actually started blogging before I arrived, and I was documenting my arrival for my family.
Yes.
And because I had a lot of free time, you know, like I was, my nights were quite free. It was the first time I'd ever not really had bands to go out to. I mean, it was country Japan. There was not much to do at night, except sit in a little tiny izakaya and get drunk on sake, which
I'm not against that.
No, but you can't do it every night. So I'd go home and I'd blog. I'd you know, write my day, and I'd share my photographs because I bought a digital camera. And I just got better and better at technology because I was researching and I was trying to make the experience more user-friendly for my family. It was all about my family to start with, and my friends. But and then it just sort of, I don't know, people started finding me. It was still very early days of Google, and I don't know, but I started finding people following me and leaving comments, and then I started noticing other Japanese bloggers or Japan bloggers making comments and then sharing their link to their blog, and so we just started cross-posting and commenting on each other's blogs and sharing our experiences, and then we ended up. We had a couple of social days where we'd all meet up in Tokyo. I'd catch the bus in and we'd all meet up, and you know, it was so exciting to have these new friends that I felt like I knew really intimately because we all were writing so much. And I got really bored in Fuji Yoshida because it's beautiful, but there's nothing to do. So I moved into Shimokitazawa, into a big thing called Gaijin House, which is where a bunch of foreigners...
A shared house where foreigners come together, and Shimokitazawa is like, how would you describe it? It's a place that has second-hand stores that sell crocheted cardigans.
It's a hipster.
Yeah,
it's very hipster.
Yeah, that's right.
Lots and lots of life.
Yeah, not exactly studenty, but more like lots of little record shops, lots of second-hand stores, lots of purple crochet. Yeah. That kind of vibe, right?
Lots of cool bars.
Yeah.
And lots of live music.
Yeah.
So yeah, I ended up there, and so that it turned out that I didn't know anyone in that house when I moved in. Well, I didn't know who they were, but I realised that the guy in the hallway, across the hallway from me, was someone I knew, Tim he was a music person from Melbourne in Australia, and he'd actually come to the zoo a few times. So we were standing in the kitchen, like pointing at each other, like, I know you. Whoa. And it took us ages to work it out. And we got there, and we still to this day, run into each other. He was tour managing Kurt Weill, and I was backstage at a festival not long ago, and it's like, you again. So it's lovely. So, those connections stay on. Yeah. So being in Shimokitazawa, I was right in town. We were all really excited to hang out with each other and share our experiences of Japan, because, it's not easy living in Japan, living in a different culture, a non-English speaking culture, where you have to learn, this new, quite complicated language, and this very different culture and, you know, the challenges that presents, but also the joy that it brings.
Yeah.
And the beauty. I mean, you know, Japan is simultaneously the ugliest and the most beautiful, you know, place on the planet. The gardens and the mountains and the, you know, beautiful historic houses and the tatami and the ritual and, you know, the old temples and all that stuff. I mean, to this day, I kind of ache for it.
Yeah, everybody who says that.
Yeah, but then I see images of suburban Tokyo and I'm reminded of how ugly it was. Anyway, so yeah, I stayed in Tokyo for 7 years, and that's where, you know, my photography, through my blog, I mean, everything happened because of the blog.
Because of the blog. So the blog was called Frangipani. That's been retired now, sadly, because it's a beautiful historical memoir. But
I've kept all the writings.
Hey?
I've kept all the writings and all
Good.
the photos in a folder, so I will make a book of it one day.
Oh, please do. I'll publish it. So this is how I met you, and I don't actually know the route that I took to get there. I don't know how I happened upon your blog, but what the everything happened in the comments. Then your blog was called frangipani.info, maybe not even .com.
Such a ridiculous. I mean, I'm sure that the Frangipani shop, you know, traders around the world hated me.
But so anyway, so that was that. I didn't even know what Frangipani was at the time. I don't even think it was Google at the time, something it. And then but the first ever post that I saw, and I don't know how I got to it, was the account of your mum dying. There was this really, really beautiful, visceral, detailed account of your mum's death, and your feelings around it and everything. And that was like, oh God, who's this woman? So then I started following your blog, which at the time for me meant logging into it every single time I wanted to, because I didn't know, like somebody was like, oh, you're on my RSS feed, and I was like, yeah. Oh, to this day I don't know what that is. So I just
it's pretty much redundant now.
I used to go and visit, like I just remember whose blogs I did, but also we would comment on each other's stuff a lot. And in fact, in my hall downstairs is a photograph that I won because I was the 1000th commenter on your blog.
I remember. Is that how we met, maybe?
No, it wasn't. No. Oh. No, it wasn't, because that was when you started using the Holger, and we already knew each other then.
Okay.
So so there was that. I think we met when I decided I wanted you to do my wedding, and I think we met when we started having the meetings for that. But again, I felt like I already knew you because we've been interacting. So mine was called Sigsy in Tokyo and was far more amateur thing. There was
very funny.
There was a number of us. I know I feel like I've lost my comedy edge these days. I'm going to be bringing it back in a bit more. I could be wrong. I'm pretty
very natural.
Thank you. So yeah, I think that needs to be revisited. But back to you. So do you just want to tell us a little bit about that post, and what is it that helped? What was it that made you, like, these days, and this word makes my skin crawl, which is unusual for a coach, vulnerability is a fucking commodity these days, excuse my language. I hate it. Nobody gets to feast on my vulnerability. But to me, that's what really made me go, who is this? Because I just thought it was so beautifully written, such a great homage to your mum, but also it didn't spare you any details of the emphysema and the septicemia, maybe. And
just the emphysema.
I'm sorry, I hope this doesn't trigger you, Martine.
No, okay. It's fine.
So it was a bit late if it did, but still, you knew it was coming. So anyway, so just to be clear, listeners, we did a line on this before we got on the call. So yeah, so could you just want to tell us a little bit about that post, and then actually let's just do both together. And then when your dad died, I remember you wrote a post and it was titled "Please Hold On, Dad," because he was already dying and you wanted to get back before he actually, so you could hold his hand as he slipped into the whatever comes next. So do you just want to tell me about those and why you were so honest?
I love visceral writing. I think it's the most powerful kind of writing, and it's also extremely cathartic. So my mum's post was, well, I had a friend at the time who was, I'd been very close with, and she wanted to understand death and what it felt like. She found the whole thing a bit of a mystery, and she wanted to know how I was, what happened and how I was feeling. And at the time that she asked me, I said, it's not, no, I can't talk about it.
No.
So a little while later, she put the germ into my my head, and I just sort of, as I got back to sort of daily life, actually that was after Dad, no, because Mum already died. I just sort of let it sit in my head for a while. I'm just starting to remember really key things, and so I just started putting them down in just a bit of in note form, and then I just sort of filled it out. And as I wrote, it was just so cathartic, because I was still, when your parents die young, you have a lot you want to say to them. Still, there was so many unfinished conversations, and I was angry at her for choosing to continue smoking, even though she'd been told many, many, many times since she was 20 to stop smoking. But, that's who she was.
Yeah.
One seed. That's her. And she just couldn't, she was so deeply ingrained in her perception of who she was, that she wouldn't let go of that. So I was really angry at her. So I just started writing, and the words just tumbled out. And it really didn't take long in the end, with the final blog post. It was just blur. took about a day, but it was all stuff I've been thinking about for a long time anyway. So, and I published it, and I sent it to her, and I said, "This is your answer." And then boom, it exploded, and I actually got contacted by a literary journal who published it.
Wow.
I changed some of the names because it was still a bit fresh, so I went under a pseudonym. And then with Dad again, I think there's nothing worse than knowing that your dad's, there was so much guilt around being in Japan away from him, and when he was missing Mum so much, and he was quite lonely, and we'd talk. By then Skype was a thing, so we would Skype quite regularly, and I don't know, he ended up having a massive heart attack, so he held on. Luckily, he'd scheduled an appointment with the doctor, a house visit call, and the doctor, our family doctor, who was also Mum's family doctor, came and in the morning after he'd had the heart attack. So he was too far gone by then, but he wasn't dead yet. So they got him to the hospital. All the phone calls were made. My brother was living in North Queensland. I was in Tokyo. We coordinated so that we landed at the same time in Brisbane airport, and our cousin picked us up and drove us to Nambour Hospital where he was. And it's just really hard to have that kind of death when you're so far away. I remember getting news, and I was in the kitchen and I was on the phone, and I remember just my legs just gave way. I'm getting teary. And I just dropped. I was just on the floor sobbing. It was intense and visceral. And I don't know, I just sort of, I think it's writing about that kind of really visceral, those feelings is really cathartic and good for you. And it's important, I think, for people to know what those feelings are. So to help arm them when they're going through it, or to understand what I'm going through, or I don't know. But yeah, I ended up posting. We got there and we sat there with him for a while, I remember taking a picture of, like, I held his hand and I took a picture of our hands. But his hand was all swollen because he was, you know, he was being pumped full of stuff, and he, you know, his heart wasn't working properly. So, you know, so much fluid retention, and yeah. So I posted that picture, and I think I wrote, he waited with his bags packed.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
He waited with his bags packed. Yeah. I
Yeah,
was like that.
It was great. So, you know, we got wheeled into a private room. My brother, again, like, bless him, but he doesn't have the, he couldn't be there for mum or for dad for those moments. So it was just me.
There's usually one person who can or can't. I remember my friend had a stillbirth, and it was her dad. He was the only one who could be with her, not her mum. It happens quite often, Martine, and I think it's a real honour, actually.
Yeah, well, it was, you know, I was holding both hands, like I held both their hands.
Yeah.
One hand of both of them as they passed.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were playing music, and so, you know, and the nurses are great in those situations. They'll get you to talk about them. So, you know, you'll tell their stories to the nurses, and getting teary. Anyway, that was all years ago.
Yeah, nurses are amazing.
They are. Okay, next.
That was lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, I can tell you now that I revisited those 2 blog posts over and over and over again. It's not a one-stop shop, that isn't, because each time something else was delivered back, and just the honesty of it was just very, I just think it is important to have these stories. It is important to have these stories held somewhere. And I appreciate you for that, actually, Martine. It was really, I don't know if I have the right word for it. I don't know if I have the right word.
I think people don't talk about death enough. There are certain topics that are a bit taboo, and I remember when mum first died and I was still quite young, none of my friends, I didn't see a lot of my friends for almost a year, because they just didn't know how to process it and how to handle it and how to be with me, and how to, like, they couldn't say anything about what had happened to me. They knew that I'd gone through a significant change, but they didn't know how to deal with it. So I think writing about that stuff is a really important part of the, you know, taking away some of the fear and stigma around death. It's a natural part of life. We all have to go through it, and everyone around us has to deal with it. So,
and of course, in Japan, we have open caskets, and you go and you put flowers around it, and it just becomes much more part of the journey, if you like, part of the story, part of the stories. And I find that really useful in the you know, the number of, you know, funerals that I've been to here as well. Great. So then you stay here for a while, you become a photographer, you've got all these friends, and then you move back to, you make the decision, your time here was done. You need a really good reason to stay in Japan. Otherwise, 2 things can happen. 1, what happened to me is I've built a life here and built a family here. Or 2, the other thing that happens is you wake up at 60 one day and go, oh my God, why am I still here?
yeah,
interesting choice. But what you did is you stayed for 7 years, and there's nothing wrong with that. If people want to stay here until they're 80, you know, that's completely fine. But a lot of people do just make that mistake of being pulled into, I wouldn't say it's only Japan, you get pulled into a certain situation and then suddenly you're like, what happened there? So yeah, so then you moved back. What precipitated that? It was just your time.
It was my time, but I was also getting quite sick, and I didn't really know it at that time, but I developed an autoimmune disease, or 2 autoimmune diseases, and you know, there was so little known about that stuff at that time. I didn't know what was going on. All I knew was I was just feeling terrible. I had a whole range of symptoms. I didn't realize at the time that they were symptoms of this disease. I just thought I was really burnt out. I thought Japan had just, or Tokyo, living in Tokyo, and the pace, the frenetic pace, and, you know, I'd been involved in so many things, and I wasn't living all that healthier life. I was doing a lot of drinking, going to bars, and yeah, not eating all that well, and just getting more and more kind of depressed and anxious, and couldn't handle the crowds anymore. I was just getting really angry at navigating Shibuya, and even Kichijoji, where I was living at that time, was just such a...
You were getting angry, you were getting depressed, you were getting anxious, you weren't feeling well. What I'm hearing is, because if I remember the time that I knew you, you never really used to overdrink, and you always ate well, and you're always really mindful of your body. So it sounds like it was disproportionate, the feeling was disproportionate to the unhealthy lifestyle, but just enough that you would be, maybe it's my unhealthy lifestyle or something like that. So fast forward to when you got back to Australia. What autoimmune diseases did you uncover, and then how did you start to work with them and deal with them?
Yeah, so I decided to move to North Queensland because I was just so exhausted. I knew I just needed somewhere peaceful to go, and my brother, and my brother was living in a beautiful part of the world, so moved in with him for a while and started a job. And I was sitting at the desk that day. You know, it had been happening a lot, but this particular day I was particularly dizzy, and I actually said to my boss, "Oh my God, I can't stand up. I've got to lie down." She bundled me up into, fortunately, the nearest doctor's surgery just happened to be a holistic surgery, thank God, because it saved my life. And I went to see a doctor there called Dr. Liz, and she did a bunch of tests, and she asked me a bunch of really weird questions that no doctor had ever asked me before. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I like you. And she organised a couple of blood tests, and then she said the results will be back in 2 days. Call in then and we'll talk about it. And then 2 days came, and I rang, and she said, I've got one more test to run, so give me a call back in another 2 days. And, you know, the wait was excruciating. And she called me in to the surgery, which is never a good sign. And she said, okay, you have anti-parietal cells or parietal cell antibodies in your stomach, which means that you have pernicious anemia, which is a B12 disease. And you are extremely deficient, not only in B12, but also iron. So you're very iron anemic. And so I started having B12 shots pretty much that day. And I still have to have B12 shots to this day. And it's, you know, there are times when I have to have B12 daily, and there are times when I can get away with it weekly. But at that time, the treatment was every 3 months after the initial range of loading doses. Anyway, track forward about maybe 5 years ago, and I was just getting worse and worse, and the whole 3 months injections weren't working for me. I had definitely flared up. I had all sorts of stuff going on, IBS symptoms, gut health, like crazy anxiety. Like I'd never been an anxious person before this, but and so I started doing my own research and found out that actually parietal cell antibodies, the pernicious anemia part, is actually the end stage of another disease called autoimmune gastritis, autoimmune atrophic gastritis, which is gut. Basically, your stomach lining gets really damaged. And that was a bit of a revelation. So I just kept on deep diving down into that world, and started exploring the role of nutrition and supplements and you know, food as medicine. And basically over that sort of the last 5 years, I've come full circle, and basically my symptoms are absolutely manageable. I'm perhaps the healthiest I've been in decades. I eat a ridiculously healthy and clean diet. And I am working on repairing my DNA, because I've found out that I've got a whole lot of DNA, damaged DNA polymorphisms, or, you know, polymorphisms that are a little bit broken, which affect well, the effectiveness of the enzymes and the genes in you. So for me, I've got polymorphisms on my transcobalamin 1 and 2
How do you
molecules.
test for that, Martine?
How do you test for it? It's a DNA test. So you can use any of those Ancestry type tests.
Yeah.
And then you can do a raw data download and then upload it to another website.
So what they're actually looking at the DNA strands and looking what's missing from there. Okay.
Well, what it is well, let me finish. So we upload to Promethease, which is a DNA database, and it will basically go through all that raw data and identify every single gene pairing that you've got and matches it to what it's supposed to be. So it gives you a certain number of points, like it gives you a red, orange, green rating on each one, and it takes you to a page that shows you all of the problematic genes, and then it gives you links to go to all these other DNA databases, and then also there's other hefty research around DNA polymorphisms and around B12 and pernicious anemia, and it turns out I've got a number, not just TCN1 and TCN2, but also my vitamin D receptors are damaged, and a couple of other things connected to folic acid are also not good. So I've just been researching best ways to manage that, and with supplements and diet, and so that led me to when I got back, I was working in North Queensland doing event management and newspaper photography and wedding photography, and loved all that. But again, I got really bored because it's North Queensland and there's not a lot going on, and it's very right wing, and drunken, like alcohol is a huge problem up there. So I moved back to Brisbane. Just didn't have the energy to start work again as a photographer because there were so many photographers already in Brisbane at that time. Went back into the music industry, stayed in the music industry. I mean, I'm still really in it even now, even though I'm at uni. But I just got bored again. And I realised that there's just so little information in the medical world around autoimmune diseases and the role of nutrition as medicine. They treat the symptoms, not the cause. They don't look at basic, simple preventative strategies. Doctors only get to study nutrition in very tiny doses. So they don't even consider it, the vast majority of them. It's not on their list of their framework of things they have to ask and think about when they're in clinic talking to a patient. So, so I decided I already had one degree under my belt, which basically gave me easy access to another degree because I completed that degree. So I was accepted into the University of Queensland 2 years ago to study a Bachelor of Health Science majoring in nutrition. And I was planning to go on and be a dietitian. But halfway through last year, my second year, I don't know, I just found public health so interesting, all of the aspects around that, and it's the work you do in public health is so much more far-reaching than just one-on-one work in clinic. And I already do a bit of clinic work with my friends. Like I'll look at their blood tests and I'll say to them, okay, you need to be doing this, this, and this, and I love that stuff. But you've got to be careful because if you make a mistake, they're the ones that suffer.
Yes.
And I don't know, like you said, I am a community builder, and I think the role of community in public health really appeals to me. The whole and logistics and planning and helping people, like doing work that's really meaningful in all sorts of different communities and populations. So I'm extremely satisfied with the work I'm doing at uni. I love it. I'm entering my last year. And I'm probably going to go on and do a Masters of Public Health Nutrition next year. which will be 18 months, and that will take me through, so I will be, when I graduate from my master's, I will be 55.
So inspiring, Martine. So inspiring, because like, I have an itch to scratch around that as well. I was for psychotherapy, actually. I'm really interested in psychotherapy. But like, I got to the point where I was like, well, I'm 50 this year, and I thought, do I really want to do a 3-year degree now? But listening to you, it's like, well, it's just a choice. It's not a, you don't do it or you can't do it. You can find a way if you want to. But the way that I do things, and this is the way that I coach as well, it's like, okay, what's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? Because doing a degree, so I went on research. What's the next step? And it was like, send us an extended essay of X 60,000 words, citing all your research. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'll probably, certify to a higher level in the stuff that I'm doing at the moment, and maybe study counselling instead. So that'll give me the same, not the same, but some other different kind of rigor there as well, or maybe not. But I also spoke to my friend who's a psychotherapist, but it's really brilliant to hear you saying that. And again, for anybody who's listening, it's like, you're just hearing two different sides of this, two people who are thinking about doing something at the age of 50. As you've heard from Martine's interview, she's brilliant at just getting the process work done. Really brilliant. I'm probably more like one of her errant band members who needs a bit more support on that. So I just made the decision, actually, that's a brilliant gatekeeper, making somebody write a university level essay, just even to get an email back from them, not even to inquire. That's the inquiry. I love that. I love a good gatekeeping technique, or that kind of thing.
I'll tell you what's really interesting, Sarah, is nutritional psychology is a huge growing field, and the role of nutrition in all sorts of mental health disorders, and in fact the role of B12 in schizophrenia and really crazy bipolar. A lot of, the more cutting edge mental health clinics will now immediately do blood tests and check the B12 and folate status of patients and inject them immediately if they're down, and that will actually, their behaviour modifies almost immediately. So
where's all this in terms of, so it's interesting to hear you talking about public health and like that kind of, to me, I can really see how that's a really important part of the puzzle for you, because we've already talked about that kind of social awareness, that activism awareness, that kind of more. And if we're not careful when we get into these like nutrition as wellness, and we can become a little bit ableist around stuff like that if we're not very careful. But I think adding that public health piece in there can really help see the bigger picture of what the inherent societal needs are as well. So I'm just wondering where, like, obviously this is a science, it's a BSc, it's a science-based thing, but where is the whole big picture of that? Public health times doctors times the science, the scientific research. Where's all that sitting in this area at the moment? Because it's super important.
What do you mean? Like, it's a massive field. I'm not clear on what exactly
direction do you think it's going in, the kind of what direction do you think this is going in, the nutrition, the food as wellness? How does that fit in with the public health backdrop?
Okay, so I think the big thing is trying to educate people into the difference between health span and lifespan. So like in Japan, I remember being astonished. I'd be on bushwalks going up really steep hills and have these little tiny 80-year-old women running past me and climbing up these really steep mountains without, a care in the world, and we'd all be... and so that's where I was first introduced to the idea of health span, because it immediately made me think of my parents and how sick they were for so long. And you see it all the time, the more obese and, obesity and diabetes and heart disease are the biggest killers in the Western world and in the developing world it's becoming. So trying to educate people around you know, the importance of changing their lifestyle and all the research that supports that to show, you know, if you just eat a few more vegetables and do a little bit more exercise, like 30 minutes of exercise a day, instead of, you know, you might still die at the age of 80, but you will be really healthy until you're 75, and it'll only be 5 years that you're sick or, you know, unable to.
How do you see that kind of moving forward, Martine, against the backdrop of like the whole span of public health? Like somewhere like Australia or the UK has a really wide span of poverty to richness.
Yeah, it's absolutely doable.
The industry as well is a bit dodgy in many ways as well.
Shocking. It's shocking. Yeah, I think, interestingly, the Trump effect has probably actually been a beneficial thing. And I'm noticing there's a couple of the Trump effect, so the fake news effect, so the conspiritualist tag, which has come up with all of the Trump, the QAnon people. It's I see this chatter all the time across social media talking about fake news, do your research, blah, blah, blah. And now I see that the voting companies, the voting machine companies are suing all of these people for falsely misrepresenting them. And I think that I don't know, there is definitely a turning of the tide against fake news, and the people are realizing that the stuff they're reading on social media is not to be trusted.
Interesting.
And to do their own research. I see it now, even with some of the loudest people on my social media feeds, the ones that were very, you know, 5G and the Great Reset. I can see they're toning down and they're starting to speak with a bit more like, oh shit, yeah, right. So it's definitely a changing of the tide. And I want you to really think about tobacco and cigarettes and how, do you remember when we were growing up, cigarettes were everywhere, smoking was everywhere. It was hugely, you know, everyone did it. It took this relentless campaign. It was a gradual change. It took 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But, you know, here in Australia, it's now achieved, it's been so successful that smoking has been dropped down to something like, there's only about 15% of the population that smoke now. Mm-hmm. And the diseases associated with that have, they've changed quite a bit as well. You know, it's taken a long time, but you've got to basically sort of nudge people's belief systems. And it's got to be done in a really effective, authentic way through, what's the word? You know, subjective norms, like educating leaders, community leaders, to talk about the issues at hand. And gently expanding people's mind and consciousness around these concepts of processed food and how that it's not food at all, it's poison. I mean, even alcohol really is just straight poison.
And there's also like there's that sense of, I'm so happy you mentioned the conspirituality world there as well, because one of my favorite podcasts is Conspirituality Pod, which is absolutely brilliant. And what they're always talking about, because they're really, really strong public health advocates as well, is the degree of compassion that you have to have for people. So even the people who were like the QAnoners, the 5Gs, if they're suddenly going, oh, it's like having to decompress from a cult to some degree. And in that case, that you have to meet them with loving kindness and no, told you so, or anything like that, because it's shocking. It's a terrible kind of withdrawal. And the same when it comes to these issues of public health and nutrition and so on. There's, as I'm sure you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, but like there's so many layers of what's going on there, and how to incorporate these, how to call people, not call people in, but like how to involve people, like you said, community leaders, without shaming them for their cigarette habit, without shaming them for their alcohol like enjoyment, without shaming them for having lived off incredibly cheap food that's in the supermarket, that's the only supermarket for, you know, 50 miles around them, or whatever it is, or whatever other things have meant that those people have come to that point. This is all new to me, actually, because, you know, it's easy for me to be like, well, you know, you've got type 2 diabetes, sugar nut, well, surprise. But actually then I realized that's me being a narcissistic asshole. And that's actually nothing to do with public health whatsoever. That's to do with me feeling great and shaming somebody else. And I feel terribly sorry for that, because I did it for many, many, many years. So it's really interesting to hear you kind of marrying these kind of newer ideas with the public health and with the BSC and with the nutrition, and how that kind of connects back to this Trump era of review. It's almost like a new set of data is coming out, emerging out of this fake news stuff, which is helping people to research more and check what's going on.
I think a return to constructive, critical thinking. I think a lot of people just forgot how to think critically when they were looking at documentation. And I can see that there's been a definite reversal there. You can see it in all of the comment threads under, you know, the Guardian will print an article, or the New York Times, and you'll see.
Oh God, you go to the comments. That's
I love
the comments to me needing to tranquilize.
Right. You've got it. For me, as approaching it from a public health, I've got to understand that.
I understand. I see.
And it's fascinating to me. But you see that there is definitely a lot more people arguing. You cannot believe, you know, oh yeah, I can believe that because I read it on the internet. You know, ha ha. So there is definitely a switch. So, you know, the whole thing around, the misinformation around diet and nutrition and wellness will start to die. I mean, here in Australia, we've got Pete Evans, who's this absolute nut. I actually loved him initially when he first started.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he was great at the beginning. He was really genuinely interested in health and nutrition, and then all of a sudden he just went down this weird bloody and oh my God. Yeah. Well, not just QAnon, but weird health stuff as well, and and you know, trying to feed babies a keto diet, and like, oh God, radical, dangerous, really dangerous.
That's the thing, isn't it, Martine? It's like, fine, if you want to grab a crystal and, you know, drink some green juice, excellent. But when it becomes, it turns into there's a tipping point. Something happened somewhere along the line where this tipping point came and it became very sinister. And then you find that people are contributing to certain places and all this other kind of stuff. And you're like, oh my God, this is actually the Reich. This is weird. You know, something like that. It's very, very strange. And then from somebody like me who has a business like I do, I'm like, oh my God, where am I peddling this nonsense? And then I get my my nearest and dearest clients and stuff in to be like, okay, I need you to moderate me and make sure that I'm kind of keeping myself up to date across the board and make sure that I'm aligned in the places that make sense and that have that kind of, that touch on the science, that touch on the public health, that touch on the psychology, that touch on the kind of the indigenous magical side of things as well, in a respectful way, but not in that kind of appropriated weird way that whatever's going on with Pete Evans and his gang is going on. Allegedly, sorry, I don't want to, maybe we should beep out his name. I don't want to get
don't worry, he's a commonly well, and what
allegedly
what I'm going to get to is that he's actually he's almost been destroyed. He's lost all of his book contracts. No one stocks his stuff anymore. He was kicked off all social medias, although he's on some of those more underground weird ones, and he's got his own website chat board as well. So he's lost his audience. People are dropping off like flies. So I think what happened in America, you know, around the insurrection and all of that will have a flow-on effect in terms of information and control and understanding, like critical thinking. And I think it's actually a really exciting, between COVID and the Trump effect, I can see really exciting societal changes happening globally, at least I hope globally, for a better world. I'm really positive that we're moving in the right
I love that.
direction.
I mean, it's like a really nice place to start landing this conversation, because like now I can like where do you know what you're going to do afterwards? You said you didn't want to go into like having a nutrition practice now, but what do you think
So
you
I
might
won't have
end
a
up
spray
going into
clinic.
government?
Yeah, well, there's, oh God, because it's such a broad subject that I'm studying, and because of my own background skills, look, it could be anything from health advisor in government, so policy advisor, to working on the WHO, like, I don't know, helping people in Fiji set up some kind of health program, or health communication, because my skills in film and video and photography. A lot of the misinformation out there about health has been from people reading the research and misunderstanding it and misrepresenting it. So there's a really strong need for interpreters of research to be able to communicate what's the findings in a layman's terms. So, documentary maker, or just working for some kind of health organization that educates about health.
Would you not be wanting to do that in Aussie communities? Then you'd be looking to go. Have you got the travel itch again?
I will always have the travel itch, but it's been tempered by always wanting to come back to Brisbane, because this is when I came back to Brisbane after living away for like 10 years. So I was in Japan and then in North Queensland. I realised the Aboriginal part of the Aboriginal health structure is this concept of your land, your home. So being on country, they call it. So you go home to your country, and that just means your area.
Yeah.
And it's where your roots are. And coming back to Brisbane after being away for 10 years, I had the most beautiful feeling of coming home and being on country. And I became myself again in here. I feel like I really went off the rails in Japan and in North Queensland because I was so sick. It was the illness more than anything. And coming back here and fixing my health and reconnecting with my living family, apart from my brother, and my dearest friends, and being able to walk down some street in Brisbane and be able to tell you stories about that street from your personal history. And to me, that's being on country, and I really need that. I've realised, and being here in this house, 6 years now I've been here, and I have put down my roots, and I think it's really important.
So it sounds like you that's the place where you can influence. That's the place where you can bring your health and nutrition and public health notions ripple out into the Brisbane community.
Yeah, but I do also see myself doing short-term contracts in international areas, or even working on an international level, but from Brisbane.
WHO or something like that, or
yeah. That's my vision.
Interesting. All right then, Martine. So what would be your parting words to our listeners then? Any wisdom, or what's your biggest lesson over the years? Check your B12 levels.
That it's never too late to start again.
Ooh, love it. I've just got goosebumps.
And at age 50, you've still got 30 or 40 years ahead of you. And
true.
God damn it, there's so much you can do.
I know, and you think about the amount of years you waste in the previous ones. It's not exactly like they were juicy. Like, no, I'm not talking about you. I mean, anybody. People waste years and years and years. I mean, no years ever wasted, obviously, but it's like,
yeah, doing the wrong thing or being unsatisfied.
Oh, being unsatisfied, or making excuses, or whatever it is, or having reasons, or all that stuff, or just staying stuck. It's yeah, I mean, it's easy to say from the vantage point of being in your 50s, isn't it? But no, it isn't. You have to consciously make these choices, I suppose. That's what I think. And also within the consciousness or the psychological levels that we have, so I say, get your B12 checked, have an injection, and then go see a psychotherapist, and then get a coach once that's sorted out.
Oh, if only it was that easy. But it's a good start.
It's a good start. It's a good
definitely rocking the nutrition.
Yeah, rocking the nutrition, definitely. And
there's this beautiful phrase.
Is based on all this stuff we've just been talking about, Martine, and we'll close out after this. Is I'm a dealer, not a healer. I don't heal shit. Like, I don't know. I'm not Jesus Christ, and even there's questions there. I have questions. What I do is I help people deal with things.
Yeah.
I make people deal with things, and if I can't deal with it, if it's at the edge of my capabilities, then I've got a nice psychotherapist I can send you over to. She's great. It's like, and then she'll help you deal with things as well. It's just yeah. And then also all this other stuff as well, but yeah, that's my latest one. I'm a dealer, not a healer, which is a bit of a winky thing as well, isn't it?
I like it. Yeah, it's definitely got
that. Dealer. Yeah, Martine, it's been absolutely brilliant. Listen, I didn't know that it was going to go into this really interesting and rich conversation about conspirituality and unethical stuff, unethical diet stuff, and nutrition and science. It's like for all the way through from like death and grief and writing and Japan, Papua New Guinea. I mean, it's just rather it's rather amazing, this journey that we've just been on. And like you said, it's never too late to start again. I just love that. I really think it could be a cliche, but it's a cliche that's being lived out by both of us and by many people around the world. So thank you so much. There are many ways to lead a life, and everybody has stories, and I'm so grateful for Martine sharing hers so enthusiastically today. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you, my darling. Arigato.
Arigato gozaimasu. Otsukaresama desu.
Gochiso-sama.
Gochiso-sama.
We had a great meal.
Delicious food, by the way. Okay, let's leave it there.
All right. Bye.